So to kick it off to everyone, Emma, I'll start with you, but I want to know your journey through mental health, whether that's struggles or rises, and what led you to being in this chair to sit with us on this panel.
All right, hi, my name's Emma Jaskinek. So my mental health journey started pretty much at the beginning of the pandemic. In the athletic department, they give us surveys every year asking us about like our anxiety or how we're feeling and stuff like that, and I would always just lie on them. I'm like, I don't really need help, like everybody feels like I do. But then at the beginning of the pandemic, I was extremely anxious, and it was something I hadn't ever experienced before. So I decided to fill out the survey honestly, which I probably should have right away. But so then my trainer reached out to me and she was like, I think that you should go see a therapist. So I did, and after a few sessions, he was like, I think you would benefit a lot from meditation. In high school, my parents used to try and make me meditate because my mom's a yoga teacher. So I was pretty hesitant at first because I didn't ever enjoy it in high school, but reluctantly I did it, and I'm very happy I did because Chad opened a whole new world for me, and it has improved my mental health so much, and my work with meditation is what led me to be on the panel today.
Hi, my name is Chris Eyring, and a long time ago I was a Badger sprinter. I came to Wisconsin from a really small town, and so I was originally really overwhelmed, and I was actually at a pretty big meet in New York. And I had this overwhelming sense of extreme anxiety, and I started to cry, and I realized that I can't compete if I can't get this under control. And so at that time, there was no counselor, or if there was, I had no idea that if someone existed to help athletes. So I went to University Health Service at that time, and I met with the counselor. And she just had no understanding of what it was like to be an athlete and why someone would be stressed about running 50 meters. But you can't express to someone how your life is sort of dedicated and how an expression of sport is an extension of yourself in some way. So it wasn't a fulfilling experience. And so I went to UHS and tried to get on medication. It's also hard to explain to a doctor when you're a runner you don't want to have a dry mouth. And so that doctor actually laughed. So I laughed. And what I did was I just went on a journey myself to actually try to really figure it out. And I have to thank Dr. Bill Morgan. He has no idea about this, but he had a sports psychology class on campus. And he really convinced me, helped me realize that what I really wanted to do was help athletes. So I sort of had come full circle. And what I started out to do at 18, 19, 20, I feel like I'm doing, but I have to really credit him because he really helped me, get on the journey of how to become a psychologist for athletes. Thanks.
My journey's similar to Dr. Chris's. Really, I'm sitting here today, I think, stemming from work I've done for the last 7 years after walking away from the NFL. Chiefly a meeting I had with Richie Davidson in October of 2015. So I quit in March, and literally hundreds of people were trying to sell me on some therapy or some silver bullet to help with brain injury. Richie was the first person I met with that one, wasn't trying to monetize what he was sharing with me, and two, had a really modest portrayal of what meditation could do for you neurologically. So the meeting blew my mind. We teamed up with Chad, who Emma mentioned, who serves as the athletic department's director of meditation, and ran a pilot program in 2017. Since then, I've been involved a little bit at the university with their mindfulness programming. Chad's doing a tremendous job, and it's cool to see something I would have loved to have had while in undergrad be so normalized for athletes today.
So how did my journey start? 6 years ago. I think it most definitely was once I had to accept the truth that I'm an alcoholic, that I was allowing for a substance to take so much from me, and not truly answering the question when people ask me, how are you doing? Just saying, I'm fine, I'm good, it's all going well, but obviously something wasn't going right with me. And so I hopped into therapy. It was my first option, my first choice. right here across the street, actually, not too far away at Connections Counseling, and went about receiving one-on-one therapy with my guy there, Corey, and just peeling back the layers, right? Trying to understand what led me to the self-medicating process, what the underlying issues are and were. And that process is one that I will not change for anything. And then I think leading, after that moment, I was able to truly understand that there are other folks like me who are suffering in silence, right? 1 out of 4 US adults are suffering with a diagnosable mental health disorder in a given year, a quarter of the folks right here in this room today. And as I started to learn so much knowledge about that, I dove headfirst into social work, giving back to the community, and that's what led me here today, just understanding that it is a topic that we have to tear down, the stigma.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing those, thoughts. And you guys are obviously way more than an intro that I can give you. You're very multifaceted and complex. But Emma, I kind of want to dive into something that you said. You had these surveys and you were lying about them. Did either of you ever have anything like that while you were in college? Surveys that you might have been a little not truthful on?
It's probably evidenced by the fact that I don't even remember such a survey, how seriously I took it. No, I think, and can you hear me? It doesn't feel like this mic's on.
Yeah.
There we go. That's better. I don't have to shout. No, I think athletes are notoriously bad patients. There's a lot of reasons not to share any of your struggles, to ever appear weak. You have every incentive in the world not to ever appear vulnerable. I know, at least in my experience as a football player, and you get this directly from coaches, it's like, if you can't play hurt, you're not a leader. And we always push that to and past, I think, the point that's reasonable. So, no, I don't think, mental health wasn't taken seriously by me personally. It wasn't really a topic of conversation among the team. I don't even remember the survey, though I'm sure I took it.
I think I helped put that survey in. Sorry.
Thank you.
There you go. Thank you, Dr. Chris.
But it definitely brings up an interesting point of whether someone asks, how are you? And you're like, oh, I'm good, how are you? It's just an innate response that you say, or you get a survey where it might dive a little bit deeper, but you might not want to be truthful because you don't want to appear weak. So going through your life, when was the point, at what age did you finally start opening up about mental health, and who did you go to first? I know some of you mentioned it might have been a therapist or someone, but was there someone you confided in a little bit earlier? Monte, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll jump in. For me, it's I was fortunate enough to have my parents and my sisters move from the St. Louis area my freshman year in college. I still think they're crazy for doing that, but they did. But at that time, just like what Chris stated, right? It's that toxic masculinity that cultivates in the locker room, on the football field, where you don't talk about your feelings, you don't share how you're doing. You're taught not to show your opponent that you're tired, that you're crying, or that you're bleeding, and all that stuff. So that bled over into my life, and I did not lean on my support system, although it was there. And so it was a time for me where I just did not take it seriously, or truly really didn't even understand what was going on. I did not know what I was suffering from, and that's what happened with me.
I think one of the things too is, I don't know what your perception is as athletes here now, but you don't really think anyone else is going through this. That was my experience. I don't know if I'm weird or weak, or I'm supposed to be really strong. I'm supposed to compete in the Big Ten. Heck, if I'm gonna go tell somebody I'm struggling pretty bad, is this normal? I just think as a competitor, you just want to try to bust through it. That was my experience. So my parents were helpful, but I don't think they were equipped. I don't think my parents were in the generation they were supportive, but what do you do? There wasn't what to do laid out.
I think kind of off of that, when I did fill out the survey, honestly, I didn't tell anybody about that just because it wasn't spoken about. But I feel as mental health has been talked about more and more since I've been in college, it used to be you go to therapy, but now it's you go to therapy, so do I. And I think that's so interesting, how we're moving in a different direction. I'm really excited about that.
I would agree. I think you've moved the needle about lights, and I hope we do 1,000 more, but you've moved the needle immensely in my lifetime. So.
Yeah, kind of following up on that, from the time that you were a student athlete until now, Dr. Chris, how do you think the conversation around mental health has evolved?
Oh, significant. I mean, I don't think if I told my coach, I don't think my coach would know what to say. I know what he told me, and I can't repeat it here, because it's something a coach would not tell you to do today. But we just didn't talk about it. Nobody talked about it. There were no services. There wasn't meditation like Chad. There wasn't a director of counseling and sports psychology. There just was nothing. And no one talked about it. So just to hear that we're actually talking about it, what you're saying, like therapy's okay, and that's just imagine how far we've pushed the needle. That's amazing.
Yeah, even for me, I've been out of school for about 2 years, and it seems like the conversation has evolved a lot. We're having, events like this, which is incredible and such a good movement forward. But Emma, I want to talk to you about being in college during the pandemic. What similarities have you seen between your classmates, friends, people on your team as they've navigated the pandemic, and what challenges that's brought up?
I think one of the biggest things that I've seen is like FOMO, and not like the fact that like, oh, my friends are going out, like I don't get to hang out with them. We are literally missing some of the quote unquote best years of our lives, and we feel like we're missing out on just like every opportunity. So I think that's one big thing that I think a lot of people have struggled with. And I also think being in college during the pandemic, it's just everything is unknown. And like they kept telling us like it's gonna get better, and then we got sent home, and then they told us you won't have to wear masks, and then we wore them for a year and a half. And it's like, oh, you're gonna get the vaccine, like you'll be fine, but then we still have to wear masks and we still have to quarantine. And it's like nobody knew what was happening at any point, and I think that was so hard. And like for me specifically, like I'm not like a control freak, but I like to know what's happening. And so like that was like part of the reason why I reached out, because of like the unknown was so hard for me, and I like have seen so many people struggle with that.
What resources did you turn to during that time, and were those newly available, or were those something that had already been kind of implemented for you?
Well, meditation was something that I definitely like clung on to when the pandemic happened, and that has helped me so much. But I also think the conversation about mental health has improved significantly. So just the accessibility to like therapists and other resources that are available have like, it's just been so much better since the pandemic, which I think has like helped. But I am sad that it took the pandemic to bring this to light.
I know you've talked about meditation a lot. It's something you're pretty passionate about. What's the number one thing that meditation has taught you?
It like sounds cliche, and like I think it's said a lot, but like living in the present is like something that meditation has brought for me, and that's both in like my sport and in school and in just my everyday life. I felt like on the field, there was a lot of times where I used to like get caught up in like, oh, like what's the crowd thinking? What are my coaches thinking? And as I've like meditated, I've like lived in the moment, and like now I focus on like completing the pass or like shooting the ball, which is like right in front of me, and it has helped me be so much more successful. And like similarly, like in school, like instead of like worrying like how many more questions I have left on the test or when's the class gonna end, I actually focus on what's happening, and I feel like that has benefited me in school. And then just in like everyday life, I feel like I've been able to recognize my emotions so much more. Whether it's like I recognize that I'm sad or I recognize that I'm happy, like, and I realize that like I don't have to change my emotion. Like if I'm sad, like I don't have to change that, but just realizing how I'm feeling has just made me feel so much better. And yeah.
Was meditation something that you did before the pandemic, or did you start then when you were feeling a little down?
No, I hated it before the pandemic. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, my mom's sticking her tongue out at me right now. But so my mom's a yoga teacher, so like in high school they'd always try and make me do it. But like my mind would always wander, and I'm like, oh, like I suck at it and I hate doing things I'm not good at, so I'm not gonna do it. But so then when David, who was the therapist that I first saw, recommended that I go see Chad, I was like, well, he's probably knows what he's talking about, so I should go and see him. So the first thing that Chad told me after we did our first practice was that mind wandering is normal and it's okay, and bringing your mind back to the present is like what's important, and that's like what mindfulness is. And like once he told me that, I was hooked. I was like, I am good at it, and and it's like I also, my favorite thing about mindfulness is like you can do it for 20 minutes, or you can do it for 5 minutes, or you can do it for 30 seconds. Like I could take like a deep breath right now and you could consider that mindfulness. So it's like whatever you want it to be. So like my experience with it has like been so unique, and it has just like helped me become who I am, that's what like my favorite thing about it is.
And it's definitely great that it's helping you, outside of athletics and in your normal day-to-day life. Like you're saying, taking a test or focusing on maybe that one question rather than the test as a whole. That's really cool. But I want to switch gears here to you, Chris. I want to talk about the transition out of athletics. You spent 1 year in the NFL and then retired. What factors went into that decision for you?
It was personal for me. History of brain injury, and it delved into a lot of the research around the outcomes for NFL players. And it looked pretty bleak, particularly for a 5'11" run stuffing inside linebacker. So I decided to walk away. I wasn't entirely naive to how white hot of a topic it was publicly, but I think unprepared for it. So I didn't have a typical transition of a lot of former college or pro players. I really delved right away into advocacy. But one of the things that I did was try to address, like I see this challenge in former players that I've met with, regardless of injury, just that so much identity is wrapped up in your sport. And even if you leave on your own terms and you're healthy, it's still a profound disequilibrium to go from like I'm an athlete to now what? And you're so accustomed to such a regimented lifestyle. Even folks that have done great in school and graduated, it's still a challenging transition. Hate to beat the drum again, but meditation, I think. That was one of my visions in meeting with Richie, was this is something that could help during, but kind of steady the wings during that turbulent transition from being an athlete to finding what you're gonna do next. It's still an issue. Emma and I were talking about it before the panel. One of my concerns, and one thing that I think is woefully underreported, is the problems with professionalization of youth sports. When you're treated like a pro when you're 5, 6, 7, your identity's wrapped up in it, you get on like a conveyor belt of sorts, and you go through life whenever it ends, 17, 18, or 37, 38. I don't know that you're prepared for life. You've been deprived of a lot of simple skills that Chris knows well, help you navigate life and live and live a rich, full life. So sometimes I fear that athletes starting young and focusing on one sport, dedicating so much time, aren't as well-rounded as they otherwise might be.
I think research does bear that out. Your personal experiences too, but yeah, I mean, most athletes, statistically, historically, are a little bit behind with relationships, personal relationships, as well as career, compared to their non-athlete counterparts when you leave college. So I think there is a huge transition and unspoken process of finding out who you are, your identity. I know I struggled, and I work with athletes who really struggle with that, to know who they are without their sport. It is weird to walk on campus and suddenly, you were an athlete and suddenly you're not. So you walk off the bus from Big Tens or Nationals and your senior year and you're done. And no one takes you through that process. Your coach asks for your uniform back and you go on, and the freshmen coming in take your spot, and it's just odd. So even at all levels, certainly beyond what I did, I can only imagine what that's like.
Yeah, and I want to dive into Monte and Dr. Chris, your guys' experience with the transition out of athletics as well. What were your experiences like? Dr. Chris, I'll let you kick it off.
Really, I mean, I was unprepared for it. So there's not a lot of places to go as a sprinter, unless you're about top 3 in the country after that. So I was lost, I'd say, for a good year about who I was and what I wanted to do. And it took me a while to find myself. I went through anxiety, depression. I worked at ShopGo. But I had always in the back of my head wanted to work with athletes. So finally I went back to grad school and I started that journey. That really helped me. I could dig into something I totally believed in. But I did go through a period of just really struggling to find myself without being known as Chris the sprinter runner?
Yeah, same. For me, it was, as what Chris right here stated, the identity crisis going through my entire life, just focusing on the game of football, not truly having a plan for what I was going to do once it was over. It's going to be cut short. 99% of the athletes are going to be done due to an injury. And so once that moment happened for me, I panicked. Started to self-medicate even more. My lows became even lower with depression and anxiety. And just truly, again, didn't have that practice or that plan of how to go about transitioning and figuring out what else I'm good at, right? So I didn't know what other passions I had or anything else that I thoroughly wanted to dive headfirst into like I did football. And so throughout my therapy process, I was able to truly figure out who I am, other stuff that I enjoy doing, and one thing that I came out knowing was that I like helping people.
Yeah, you just recently wrote a book, Nowhere to Run, where you dive a little bit more into those struggles and hitting those low points. Why did you then decide to become an advocate for others? What decisions went into that?
Because I see it. I know other athletes today who are currently struggling with that clock, right? They know that that day is coming, and they are currently panicking right now. And obviously those who are having a difficult transition right now out of their sports, same stuff. I don't want for them to deal with that. And also folks who don't even play sports, understanding that if you don't have a plan for how you are going to manage life stressors, it's going to impact you. It will impact you. And for me, growing up, I always wanted to be a running back for the Denver Broncos. I was 8 years old and told my father that, and the plan was set in place. The plan was good to go, but one thing I did not write down was how to manage life stressors once I got to college. And that's when I started to derail.
Chris, I know you've said before you were a little bit reluctant to be an advocate at first, but then eventually came around to it. Why did you decide to become an advocate?
I still think there's some reluctance, honestly. I just think it's a problem, at least with former NFL and college football players, that there's a lot of guys that go through, maybe didn't graduate, maybe didn't get a good education, many of whom have injury. There's really no transition in place. And the 2 years after leaving the NFL, made a lot of connections with people that can be helpful. And so, the emails, calls, texts, people reaching out on social media has really never died down. I still get, something, once or twice a week, and I'm in a position to help. So I think I've never been careful not to make it my career. It's not really my passion. I do know that I'm in a place where I can help and, redirect these folks to where they can get resources. And I don't see it stopping. I think one of the things we haven't discussed yet when we talk about college athletes' mental health is let's not be naive to structurally what's changing in college sports. This is a major industry, and there's a lot of things that could be in place to better protect the athletes if they were to be employees, or athletes of non-revenue sports were they to be truly amateur. Monte and I were talking which was more stressful, playing in the NFL or playing in college?
Stressful as in, what was this conversation? I had a rough go around. I really rough go around in the league, but more stress for me, it was obviously the NFL. Obviously the NFL, more of a business, more of a commodity, right? Treated like you're expendable. You are expendable, and you feel that day one as you step in.
Well, what I was getting at there's more demands on your time in college. You practice longer, you watch more film, you're available to the media more often. You have 15 spring ball practices, 30 training camp practices, 10 or 15 bowl prep practices. I'm sure it's very similar in other sports. I see some other athletes here. In the pros, you go in and practice for 2 hours and watch an hour or two of film. You've got workplace protections in place, so the demands on your time aren't so extreme that you're constantly stressed and tired. I think change like that's coming to college sports, and I think it's important to acknowledge because, one of the things, the nuanced, concerns of mine, when I'd say critical things about Wisconsin, they were structural critiques, and I love, and trusted the people that were looking after me, but it's sometimes a difficult thing to convey. And these are big problems that happen at 30,000 feet, Congress is getting involved. That would alleviate a lot of the stress, not just for athletes, but for athletic trainers and coaches, administrators, and clinicians.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Being a student athlete is such a unique experience that it's kind of difficult to understand unless you're in it. Looking back for Monte, Chris, and Dr. Chris, what do you wish someone would have told you while you were a student athlete?
Yeah, I kind of touched on that already, and it's plan for how you are going to manage your stressors, right? Literally write it down. Who are you going to go to? What are you going to do whenever times get tough? I truly wish I had the opportunity or someone would have shared with me that knowledge that it's never going to be easy. It's not always going to be one step in front of the other. It's a zigzag process. Just make sure you have those bumpers for you in place whenever times get tough. I would have loved to have had that conversation back in college.
My dad played college football. I feel like I got good advice, and it might have fallen on deaf ears, but I would have liked to have a better idea of just how big of an industry it was.
I think I would have liked someone to tell me that it didn't have to be perfect. That you don't have to be perfect in school. You don't have to be perfect at running. You don't have to worry what that person thinks about you. You don't have to worry what the Big Ten champion is. I just wish someone would have conveyed that idea that you can manage your thinking and how where's your focus and what's really important. I don't think I really understood that till I was done with my PhD, how that is so formidable. And I see young athletes, really young, even in my practice, really struggling, female in particular, with what does this person think of me? What does coach think of me? And I think somehow that's one of our next steps. We have to start to convey in perspective what sport is or a grade is. There has to be some perspective on that.
Yeah, I want to dive a little deeper into that. You mentioned a lot of people that you see, whether that's struggling or coming in with things, and a lot of them are female. Why do you think, or what have you seen to make that the case?
Something you all mentioned too a little bit, like I think younger you're starting it as an industry, and AAU, and when I look at young athletes' schedules, I sometimes try to normalize you should have anxiety because you have no time to do anything besides eat, sleep, study, do your sport, and then repeat it. We need time as individuals, as humans, like you talked about uncut, the main part of us is all human. We need time to be and to digest and consolidate what's happening to us. And if you have zero time to do that, I just think you're going to crash.
We've mentioned some of the resources that are available that you guys have tried, but I want to go down the line and see what resources you have tried before and what works best for you. Monte, I'll start with you.
For me, it's therapy. And also, I did do IOP, intensive outpatient treatment, for 6 months, for about 4 days a week, from about 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. It was very, very extensive, but it allowed for me to, dive headfirst into a community, other folks, other diverse stories and backgrounds, and understand that, I'm not the only one that's suffering here in silence with an addiction. And so that's really what I went with. That was the resource that I utilized, and to this day, I still talk to my guy.
Meditation, yoga, therapy, and then I think finding people with like experiences. You're not exactly going to bump into another former college athlete unless you make a point of it. And despite how many times I invite Monte to work out at 5:30, he won't join our group.
It's one of those things, guys. I mean, I'm not even going to entertain it. It's like I'm not even going to say maybe. I'm not waking up at 4:30 to go. I respect it though, man.
He's 2 for 2 on dinner invites.
It's free. No.
I'm like Chris, meditation, yoga, and I need water, so I swim when I need to swim.
I think for me it's meditation and then therapy, and kind of like what Chris was saying, just like talking to other people, especially in college right now. I feel like, and my teammates, like it's just become so much more of an open conversation, and I feel like normalizing it like actually makes me feel better.
Definitely. Now, I want to get into one of the big conversations, social media. It's something that is so prevalent right now. Everyone's on it, whether you use it for something good or something bad, you're probably on it. It's probably affecting you. And I want to go down the line and dive into how social media has affected your mental health or the way you perceive yourself. Emma, I'll start with you.
Well, I definitely think my generation, probably a lot of the other athletes in this room, have been like very negatively affected by social media. I think we're always online, and that's like just what our generation is, and we're just constantly comparing ourselves to everything that we see online. And I feel like for me, it's made me like see myself like as less of a person, because like somebody online has something that I want and I don't have it, and I'm like, well, what should I do to get there? And it's just like this constant comparison of me to somebody else, when I should be focusing on myself and bettering like who I am, instead of comparing what I have to what others have.
I think you said it fantastically, the comparison factor and getting lost in a whole, it starts out as I just want to relax, so then I'll just start scrolling at different things, and then it's a rabbit hole, then I'm gone, and then I'm like really mad that I wasted my time as I got to the end of like an hour, like where did it go? So really trying to work on decreasing that.
Yeah, I'm not a huge social media person. I'm more of a consumer than a producer, so I use it to read and connect with folks. I still do the death scroll, or the doom scroll, but I think I have an okay relationship with it.
I'm super envious. We just had this conversation of Chris, because I want to get to that point. I'm bad right now on social media. It has gotten all of my attention, unfortunately, but I think once it came about when I was in college, that was really the time where I felt that fishbowl experience. A lot of athletes in here will understand that, right? Where you're tagged in certain comments, you're critiqued constantly, and you're always feeling as if those eyes are on you. And so that aspect of social media, that unfortunately is not going to go away, causes a significant amount of stressors for current athletes, and I'm assuming obviously the former athletes as well can agree to that.
I can't imagine being a marquee college athlete in the era of social media. I mean, like,
I was just gonna say a little bit about that. Like women's soccer isn't the big media sport by any means, but so like I can't even imagine like what some other people are feeling. But I remember my freshman year, like somebody wrote an article saying that like I wasn't playing well enough and I wasn't doing enough for the team, and I was 18 at the time, and I was like, I can't even imagine what they're saying about like big name sports people. And I just think that like people who are writing about college athletes like don't even realize like that we are human people who have feelings, and that what they're saying is like affecting not only our mental health but like how we're performing as well.
Yeah, Monte, you mentioned it too, being tagged in a comment or let's say an article written about how you did horrible that game or whatever the case may be. How did you handle those situations when you saw them happen?
It was always so funny in college. I grew up a mama's boy, of course, and my mother was such a warrior of just going to bat. I'm like, Mom, let it go. But
She's in the comments like that.
yeah, the fake name and all. I'm like, my mom, that's you. But to be honest, it was tough. It is tough. There's no way of getting around it. Obviously, completely shutting off your social media and ignoring it is a possibility, but again, don't put your hand in the cookie jar. You're gonna do it. You're gonna check, and it was just not easy to digest some of those stories or comments. Right, I'm 18, 19, 20 years old, obviously trying to live, quote unquote, the best years of my life, but also be a poster child for this program. I was judged constantly, off the field, and obviously, on the field as well. If I would fumble or if I miss a run or miss a block, it was these grown men and women bashing me, and it's just an unreal experience when you truly think about it. And so I just like what Chris said, I couldn't imagine nowadays going up against AI right now.
How did you try to cope with some of those things? Did you laugh it off? Did you call up your mom? What was your go-to?
Self-medicating. Unfortunately, it was, for me, when I was intoxicated, it allowed for me to quiet those voices. It silenced it. I was able to open up more with my friends, tell them I love them, tell them that I need them, and I yearned for that moment. I yearned for living in the moment, which is what I believed alcohol was giving me. And obviously, as we all understand, an addiction will trick you like that. It'll burrow itself in your mind and hope that you don't catch on to it. And so I just caution people with paying very close attention to the habits that you're creating. because those are the habits you'll fall on when times get tough.
Now that you are out of athletics and you now do not self-medicate, what are your coping strategies now when you see a negative comment or a tweet or a text?
Oh boy. Yeah, I really didn't help myself with that 6 years ago, but I ignore it. I ignore it because now I'm able to understand, right, that changes perspective. Projection is a lot what we see on social media. If you see someone on social media bashing another, it's how does this individual feel inside? And so for me, I ignore it. I tend to ignore it because I know where I'm going. I know that I'm taking one step in front of the other, and I know exactly what I'm giving back to the community, and that's all that matters.
Emma, you talked about the comparison game on social media. I think you mentioned that I'm sure a lot of us in this room have felt that before. What are ways that you try to unplug or log off, or while you're scrolling, try to kind of disassociate yourself from that comparison game?
Well, I think meditation has helped me a lot with that, where I've realized what I'm doing when it's happening. But I think just being in the generation I am and how we are always online, it's hard, and I'm always I want to step away from social media, but it's everybody's on it, and it's if I'm not on it, I feel like I'm missing out. So I think that's something that I struggle with and I need to get better with, is not comparing myself to others on social media. But honestly, I don't know what my first step would be, because going off social media just to me seems unrealistic. But I think probably just trying to figure out who I am as a person and realizing that I am enough and not having to compare myself is going to be something that's the next step for me.
Dr. Chris, I'm sure there's people that come to you all the time with these kind of situations. What do you tell them?
I think the word projection was a good one, and trying to help people understand that when people are throwing stuff at you, I always call it a wad of wet toilet paper. They're throwing stuff at you, and really it's coming from them, but it's really hard to throw back. And so what do you do with it? You don't have to hang on to it, but we hang on to it. Our job is to sort of realize that half that product is from somebody else. This isn't easy, and I don't have great advice for this because every person is different, but in the end, how do you develop enough confidence, which takes a while, a bit to really, I think, get, that you can dismiss some of that, and it's about that person throwing it at you. So.
Can I jump in here real quick to kind of piggyback off that? I think it's for me I practice reading other good comments, right? The psychological aspect about it, we'll skip past 9 or 10 comments that said you did well, you played fantastic, and just read that negative one, and that's the one that sticks with you. So I make sure that the negative articles that may be out there, all that stuff, I go and focus on the positive articles first before I even go to read the negative one.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important to try to find some kind of balance in there. Obviously, the negative ones are going to stick out a little bit more, but finding some kind of balance is good. And I remember, Emma, something someone told me a while ago was, when you're scrolling and you're constantly seeing the same kind of person and it makes you, feel bad about yourself, unfollow them. Who really cares if you unfollow someone? No one's going to call you out for it. No one should really care what you're doing with your own social media. It's something that I've tried to do, is curating my page in a way that makes me feel a little bit better. That's definitely been helpful. But another thing, in regards to mental health, something that affects it a lot is just the different identities that we have, whether that may be gender, race, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation. Those play a big factor into how we're feeling, how we're doing. And I want to know from each of you, how have your different identities played into your mental health? Emma, I'll start with you.
Well, I think being a female, kind of like I was talking about, comparing myself to others, I think has hurt my own identity a significant amount. Being an athlete has also played a big part in that, and identifying so much with my sport and finding a lot of my self-worth in my sport. But other than that, I think it's just really important to realize that your own mental health journey is going to be so unique to you, and it's important to not compare what you're feeling to what somebody else is feeling, because your bad isn't going to be somebody else's bad. It's going to be unique to you and what you're feeling. So just recognizing that what you're feeling is valid and understanding that is important.
It's a good question. I think I went from trying to be a very locked down athlete, I'm fine, into a psychologist who I thought should know all the answers. And so I sort of continued on that road till I've gotten to a point where I don't have to know all the answers. And one of the joys I really have is actually working with young female athletes because of understanding that sense of, I don't know if it's culture or where we get it, that sense of trying to make sure everyone else is happy. So your parents are happy, your coach is happy. And I know I certainly did that. So whether that's a female, a personal Chris item, a little bit of both, I think that's something that I'm still sort of working through and trying to, I get lucky that I get to help you with that because it's always a reminder for me.
One thing I kind of wanted to add with that, which I was talking to one of my teammates the other month, and so especially when I was growing up, I thought my parents wouldn't love me if I didn't play well at my sport, and I thought that was something that was so unique to me, and it was like really hard for me to talk about it with my teammate, and it was like the first time I had ever done it. And she was like, oh, like I felt the same way. So I think it is maybe, I don't know if it's a female thing or just the way youth sports are now, but that was definitely something that I struggled with as well.
I don't know if you guys can add to that.
It's hard to segue from that. Sorry about that. No, I think Monte said it earlier, like toxic masculinity. And really I didn't experience it as much within football as like the culture surrounding football.
Absolutely.
So I got like a lot of empathy from my peers when I quit, and then I got called a wussy or a quitter or whatever from like fanboys. So navigating kind of like a broader culture of like a caricature of masculinity has been a headache for me.
So yeah, I'm going to take this a different route. Obviously being an African American, being BIPOC, to be more specific, Black, Indigenous, person of color here. We understand the healthcare disparities, right? With our communities of color compared to obviously our white communities, and there are not a lot of successful stories of folks of color making it out of addiction, making it out of all of the turmoils that they go through, unfortunately. And so I think that going throughout my life, right, that's not what we talked about. That was something that we did not share. I didn't even know that my father was a recovering alcoholic until I was 21. All right, 20 or 21, and I don't fault him for that, but again, it was what he was taught. And so I just think that we have to really, truly start to understand these disparities and focus on tearing those down as well, because those are what uphold the stigma as well.
You mentioned it earlier, and Chris, you just alluded to it, but Monte, you've talked a lot about being in these toxic masculine environments. How did that help shape you as a person and player growing up?
Yeah, it's one documentary that I really, really love, The Mask You Live In. I think it does such a wonderful job really showing a little boy's relationship with his father, and how sports is that child's avenue of showing his dad how tough he is, how strong he is, right? I was telling my father that, I'm strong, I'm tough, because I'm hitting people super hard, and then also I have the coach telling me, don't cry, don't show your opponent that you're tired. So what was taught on the football field bled over into my real life. I mean, it's year after year what I learned, and so it's that plus also what Chris stated as well. Sort of the culture surrounding the sport too, sort of this gladiator-like atmosphere where the folks down in the arena are no longer humans. They're wearing costumes. They are providing us joy by beating up on each other, and oh, he's hurt, put somebody else in. I think the culture surrounding it as well helps to literally uphold it. It keeps it going, unfortunately.
And the question was about toxic masculinity while playing.
Yeah, or growing up or in general, or while playing football.
I was always a really sensitive kid and a good athlete. And I think, but because I performed well in sports, like I was allowed to be a sensitive kid too. But I think other sensitive kids that weren't good athletes weren't considered manly or tough. So who cares how fast you are or how hard you can hit? Like that's not what it means to be a man. And there's a whole spectrum of personality types and, you know, sexual orientations and the like, that still aren't really accepted in high level sports. I mean, there's two openly gay NFL players. I don't know of many in the college ranks. So there's still a lot of progress to be made within college sports.
And being in those environments and having that kind of shape you, and you mentioned you were allowed to feel sensitive. Why do you think that was? Why were you the one that was allowed? Yes, you were a good athlete, but why?
I think performing. I mean, frankly, like, you know, if you're, you know, it's hard to say humbly, but like if you're an All-American, then you can, like, you know, watch Curb Your Enthusiasm and, you know, like play Scrabble at training table.
Right.
Like,
It's so true. It's so true.
Allowed to do your own thing a little bit. So yeah, I don't think it's right, but I think like if you're producing, you get to just fully be yourself. But I knew other guys that were like-minded that, you know, were insecure about like wanting to appear tough, wanting to appear like a man. And like they were kind of looked down upon because they weren't, you know, contributing to the team.
Thinking about those environments that you guys might define as, you know, toxic or toxic masculinity, what is something that either you think has changed or hope would have changed by now, the time that you're kind of outside of it looking in?
Yeah, I think we are starting to see the trend a little bit, right? It's better late than ever, of course. But having more folks like, you know, Chris, myself, other players who played well in their sport, but talking about a topic that's extremely important, that every single person is impacted by, directly or indirectly. We're starting to see that a lot. Kevin Love, I would say, kind of kicked it off. And then we have a lot of other athletes doing the exact same thing. And so I think if you are someone who has that stage, given the abilities to create a stage to talk about something, this is the topic that you need to speak of. And so I'm starting to see it, the snowball effect in a good way.
I think panels like this, conversations like this, I see a lot of athletes in the seats. I didn't go to anything like this when I was in school, so that's progress in 8 years. In terms of room to grow, probably many areas, but I'm optimistic about the progress I've seen.
I don't even think when I was an athlete that someone on my team would have mentioned to our coach that they were gay. So I see it having gone really far in my experience, and still time to go. So I mean, I think in some sports, some things are more acceptable, right? And we see that, and what you're talking about is still this push. Same thing for mental health. I think some of it, the coach kind of helps set that tone too a little bit. And having a coach on a panel, I think sometime would actually be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And transitioning into that a little bit more, what are some ways that coaches or other school administrators can help cultivate environments where they feel comfortable going to them with struggles or just wanting to open up? And if you have an example of something that's happened to you in the past, please feel free to share. Emma, I'll start with you.
Well, one thing that I think has changed since I've been in college, like my freshman year, like we had a psychologist come in and he would tell us like, here's our phone number, like if you're struggling, like reach out to me, and that would be the only thing we'd ever talk about, and then we wouldn't talk about anything. So I think for me and a lot of like other athletes in the room, it was like we could only go to the psychologist if we were actually like struggling and having very like horrible thoughts. But since then, I think it's our coach, at least my coach, has just like talked about it so much more freely. And I think now, not like it's like a common locker room topic, but it's definitely like talked about in our locker room, which I don't think has happened in the past. So I think just talking about it more and making it a casual topic, even though it's serious, is gonna help a lot.
Yeah, I think when I began my role as the director of clinical and sports psychology, I was the first person to actually be in-house, so to speak. Until then, all mental health for athletes was sort of pushed to the community. We really didn't even use the University Health Service very much. It was community providers. So when it came in-house, I think some of this is starting to grow, where coaches are sitting in on conversations about mental health, athletic training staff, is helping to grow the dialogue as well. I think administrators are hearing it more, bringing in programming more in-house. I think that's helped a lot since they've sort of have brought it right on site next to tutors and other services. So.
One specific thing that you mentioned backstage, the injured players group, is that ongoing? Is there?
I don't know if it's still going.
I see some head nods. That's amazing. Like nothing like that existed while I was playing. There was one year I had 3 consecutive surgeries and was out for 18 months and not doing well personally, pretty depressed. I would have loved to have had that group available, so I'm really glad it exists today. I hear it's going well, right, Liz?
Great.
Yeah, literally what everybody said here. I think having that representation, right? Having the folks who were right here on campus, just like Uncut Madison, putting together stuff like this, because I believe the initiation of representation, right, sparks that process of change. I think whenever you were able to rely on other former students or current students, who are doing the work, who are creating the space, I think that allows for other people to feel more comfortable to fill that space, right? Especially if they see other folks, their colleagues, their teammates or what have you, in the seats that they want to sit next to.
And taking it to a more personal level, what are ways that a friend or a teammate can help you feel more comfortable in opening an environment that makes you feel like you can reach out to them? Monte, I'll start with you.
Wow. Can you ask the question again?
Yeah, what are ways that a friend or a teammate on a personal level can figure out a way to cultivate an environment where you feel comfortable talking to them or opening up to them?
Yeah, I think it's just having this conversation. Having the conversation, I don't think people are, and hopefully people are starting to understand how important it is just to create the space. Just allow for people to talk, how are you doing, and actually demand a true and honest response from them. I know that might sound a little selfish, but no, take as much time as you need. I want to know exactly how you're doing. Don't just tell me that you're good or you're fine. We're all dealing with something right now. Please share with me what it is you're dealing with. So again, it's creating these spaces, and I feel like we're heading in the right direction right now.
Yeah, I think interpersonally, be a good friend. Do what you want them to do for you if you were in need. And if the concern is more dramatic than that, having the wherewithal and courage to talk to people that might be able to intervene or help.
I would say really watch your language. So all of us are so busy in our own worlds that we forget about our teammates. When you say, how you doing? And you walk by and they say, great. And you really don't know. Maybe with the recent suicides, if we can give us a pause for a moment, just to check in, just a tad deeper, and you're really doing okay, like that would make a difference. You don't have to solve your friend's problem, but offer to go with a friend somewhere. I think we get afraid of that question because maybe we won't know what to do. It's okay if you don't know what to do. The biggest thing is that you're there and you're willing to walk with that person somewhere. But I think we first have to take that pause, which Chad would teach you in meditation, to have that pause, which is that awareness that someone might just say they're fine, but if you're paying attention, you might notice something different.
Kind of directly off of that, I was talking with one of my teammates earlier today, and she was saying that we feel like when we ask somebody if they're okay, especially with what has been happening, people are actually starting to open up more about how they're actually feeling, which I think is one of the biggest steps going into the next direction. For things to get better, you actually have to seek out help, and even though it's hard, sometimes that's what you need to do to get the help that you need.
Yeah, and Dr. Chris, I kind of want to dive in deeper a little bit about what you talked about. What would be the best strategy to maybe approach someone who you think might be really struggling but might not have come to you directly, but you do feel comfortable going to them, and what might want to be avoided in that conversation?
It's a good question. So I'm going to talk in very general terms. But I think it's always good to be noticed. Yes, like you look down today, or there's something going on today, I see a difference. One of the questions I just read that we can ask people, are you feeling like yourself? I've noticed you're not yourself. Because it's so general. You're not really implying anything, and I really want to know, are you feeling like yourself? I think noticing that and being able to say that to someone and then really sincerely mean it is important. But the next step, like you said, is can we actually take time to listen and then not feel like we have to solve it? Like, how can I be there for you? I want to be there for you. Can we go talk to someone together? It's that walking with somebody.
And just going up to them and maybe saying, you look like you've been down, that might be something that even makes them feel better, just knowing that someone noticed that they don't feel like they're alone in whatever they might be going through. To finish up here, one of the last few questions I want to go to each of you. Emma, I'll go to you first. What do you think is still missing in the mental health discussion?
I think one of the biggest things that's missing from the mental health discussion is, I feel like right now it's all focused on like, if you have like very poor mental health, going to good mental health. But I think a thing that's not talked about at all is like, even if you have like fine mental health, like how can you become like even better? And like, what are the steps you can do to better yourself and like become the best person that you can be?
I've been thinking about this question since Sarah and other folks a lot. It's sort of like, what's the next step? And it has to be some action. So I'm going to go back to, can we get coaches and administrators in dialogues more like this so they also can know and see how to help athletes and even dialogue with athletes who are actually having some struggles. So we know we equip coaches and administrators and other people with skills, just like we want athletes to have skills. So I think our next step is that, and resources, man. We need more resources.
I would echo more resources, and then also, alleviating pressure, less demands on time, more security with your role and whatever it is as an athlete, kind of taking the notion or the reality that the coach has power over you, or complete control of your life, taking that away.
Same. More resources. I don't think you can ever have too many resources because everybody's story is different. Everyone's going to need something different. So for sure, more resources and more call to action. I mean, that's where it's at. I want for people to just really stop having meetings about mental health, but actually start to put pen to paper and actually doing things. Reallocating funds. I mean, I don't want to get too political here, but there's some things that we can truly do to help out.
We have more assistant coaches than we do psychologists or counselors helping athletes. So, like something at some point, let's just consider the reality of that.
Yeah. To finish up here, if anyone either was dozing off or wasn't fully paying attention, might have not paid attention for a little bit, what's the number one thing that you want someone to take away from this panel and maybe something that you said tonight? Monte, I'll start with you.
Yeah, that's easy for me. It's you have to make a plan. You have to make a plan. As we make plans, obviously, to how we're going to dominate on the football field or in the swimming pool or obviously our classwork, right, to a test or finals, you have to make a plan of how you're going to manage your stressors. What are you going to do when times get tough? Who are you going to talk to? Who are you going to lean to? What resources are you going to use? Because those tough times are always going to be here.
I'll cheat off what Monte said to open. A quarter of us will have a diagnosable mental health disorder. So it's something that affects everyone. I think that stat alone should help us relieve the stigma.
What was the question? What's one big thing you want to
The number one thing you want someone to take away from tonight?
Talk about mental health. Don't be afraid of it. Let's go at it. Let's get it out there. Just like we're moving ahead with other topics. Let's dive in.
The only thing I really have to add is that like you're not alone in what you're going through, and there are, especially for a lot of people in this room, there's resources out there, and just taking the first step to better yourself is something that can be hard, but it's important to do.
Whether it's taking that first step, talking about it, appearing on something like this, it's so helpful in the discussion to destigmatize mental health in general. And I cannot thank you guys enough for sharing your stories and being so vulnerable, because it's hard to do with a friend, let alone a room of 200 people. I know that can be difficult. So thank you guys so much, and I appreciate it incredibly, and I know everyone here probably does as well. So if we get a round of applause for our panelists.